Hi, in this session, we are going to be going over variables. This is all existing on JSBin, so I'll be sharing the URL and you can see the code in action. We have been seeing in our past tutorials this example very often, which is variable x is equal to 5, variable y is equal to 6, and variable z is equal to x plus y, and then we do a console log for z. Now, variables are nothing but data store containers, which is they store values for that data. You can relate this to our algebra in a way where we have price 1, price 2, you buy two items, one is of $5, one is for $6, and then you do a total which is 5 plus 6, and when you do an output you should see the same total as 11. So in programming, just like in algebra, we use variables like price 1, price 2 to hold values. In programming, just like in algebra, we use variables in expressions, which is total is equal to price 1 plus price 2. The next thing that we need to go over before we go over the variables is identifiers. Now, identifiers are nothing but they are unique names that identify a variable. And we have already gone over the theory of how to name an identifier and what are the conventions. So let's just quickly go over it in the code and see what we can do versus what we cannot do for an identifier. An identifier can contain any letters A to Z, can contain any numbers 0 to 9, can contain a dollar sign or an underscore sign. So these are the valid letters or characters that can be used to form an identifier. Now, the name must always begin with a letter. So in our scenario, we've been using price 1. So whenever I declare a variable price, it is a valid identifier. Now, the identifier can also have a dollar sign or an underscore sign to start with. So if I have a dollar sign, it will still work. If I have an underscore sign, it will still work. But if I have a 1, which is it starts with a number, and I try to run that example, I should be getting an error saying an unexpected number. And as I mentioned earlier, that this is the only way that JavaScript can understand that this is not a number and this is an identifier. And that's why you never start with a number. And once again, the names are sensitive. So variable price is very different than variable price. So you need to be very careful on how you define or declare your letters. And the best example or the best scenario is you have it as camel case. So for a camel case variable name, it should be variable, let's say, first name. So you'll have first name, where the first word will have all lowercase and the second word or probably the subsequent words will have the first letter in uppercase. That's a common nomenclature that we follow while naming a variable. And again, we already went over a set of reserved keywords that you cannot use for declaring a particular variable. For example, you cannot have a variable of name variable or var. In this case, JavaScript will not allow you to do it. The next we are going to go over is the assignment operator. And we have already seen how it works. For example, variable m is equals to m plus 5. You can see that I have done an assignment. I just wanted to bring this up to you that it is not the same as in algebra. We earlier saw examples where we related our JavaScript programming to algebra, and this is where the algebra differs from JavaScript syntax. So in algebra, this may not be a valid statement. You can definitely not have m is equal to m plus 5. It makes no sense. However, in JavaScript, you are actually saying that assign m a value of m plus 5, which is a valid scenario. It is different than equals to in terms of algebra. In algebra, it means equals to. Now, in JavaScript, equals to is usually denoted by a double equal to sign. So that's how you define equals condition in JavaScript, which we will cover later, but just wanted to bring it to your attention that assignment operator doesn't work the same as in algebra. JavaScript data types. So, what are JavaScript data types? JavaScript can hold numbers like 100, 200, 300, and also it can store text values like John Doe, which we already saw. So let's assume that JavaScript can have many data types, Two of them are numbers and strings. Any text value is called a string. Let's say I declare a number saying variable pi is equals to 3.14. So I can have a number which is either a decimal number or I can have a number which is equals to 100. Both of these are valid assignments and declarations. Similarly, I can also have a string where I can have name is equals to John Doe. Now make sure that when you give a particular name, either you have a double quote, the string in double quote, or the string in a single quote. That is the only way that you can assign a string value or a text value to a variable in JavaScript. Now when we try to put this onto the console, let's say I put pi, number and name. What we get? Now you should be seeing 3.14, 100 and John Doe. And you must have noticed that I gave a lot of parameters to this particular function separated by a comma. And previously you have seen that you have used a plus sign between the string and the text. So you can also do a console.log for variable parameters using a comma. You can separate them using a comma and they'll be treated as a separate console.log statement. Now let's come to declaring a particular variable. Let's say I have pi which is already declared to 3.14, and if I do a variable pi and I still do the same output, which is here, I should be getting the same output. It doesn't get reassigned. Even if I do it as 3.18 and try to run this same example, I should see 3.18. So the same pi variable gets updated with the data, and this declaration is pretty much useless. And if you need another variable, you definitely need to change the identifier. Similarly, you can have one statement and many variables in a same line. For example, I can have variable a equals to 1, b equals to 2, and c equals to 3 on the same line. I can also add a string variable saying new name is equals to John Doe. I just changed the letter W to E. Now the new name is a new variable, so you can have many variables declared in the same line, separated by a comma. You can also split this across multiple lines by pressing an enter key for better readability, so that you know that all these are separate variables. Now, whenever you assign a variable or whenever you declare a variable temp, and you just leave it and you try to put an output and see what this temp value holds, the answer would be it will be undefined. So undefined is the value that gets assigned whenever you declare a particular variable, so that whenever you want to check for a condition saying, hey, if this variable holds a value, and if it doesn't, you'll get the value as undefined. We already saw some arithmetic operations that we did to see how the price and the total goes together. Now it worked very well because the data type was the same. It was the number. If you see, both of them were the number, so the total also was a number. Now what if my data type is different? Let's see with an example. So my variable data is equals to, let's say 7, which is a string, plus 2 plus 3, 4 rather. Console.log data. So what do you think should be outputted? Just think before seeing the answer. So you can see I have 7, 2 and 4, where 7 is a string. So if you have a single string into your data, the entire addition becomes a string addition. So your output will be 7, 2 and 4. 7, 2 and 4 as a string. Let's copy and paste this and create another scenario where we have data 2, and let's move this 7 to the very end. Does this change? What do you think? Let's output data 2. Let's run and see what happens. Now you see that 2 and 4 are added, and then it sees it as a string. So 2 and 4 becomes 6, and the next addition gets converted to a string, and that's why you see the output as 67. That's all about variables, and I'm sure we'll be using variables all throughout because they are the very basic building blocks for writing any JavaScript program. See you in the next session.